Okay, hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the final webinar in our series really that has marked the sort of beginning of preparations for the launch of our new self-assessment questionnaire and risk assessment tool happening in February and March of 2020. And so far we have heard about the changes coming to these tools and what our new tools are going to be looking and feeling like. And today's webinar is really a culmination of that and a chance to hear from members and get some input from you really on how you might feel you need supporting in taking up our new tools, successfully using them, and we'll be reflecting on that towards the end of this webinar. I'm very happy to say that today we have some guest speakers, which is exciting. My name, firstly, is Rebecca White. I'm the training manager here at FedEx. And we also have Rebecca Toomey, who's head of account management at FedEx, who will be joining me as well. And she's going to be commenting and answering some questions. And we also have Baz Vandenbrink. He is the sustainability manager at Intersnack Procurement and a member of FedEx. And also Rachel Dickens, who's the corporate services specialist in the ethical trade group at Morrison Supermarkets. And we will be hearing from them shortly. So the agenda today is that I'm just going to briefly talk about the aims of this webinar, what we hope to get out of it. And then we will hear from handing over to Baz and Rachel to introduce a little bit of background about their companies. And then we will basically be just talking through and hearing from Baz and Rachel on 3 questions. So firstly, how is risk assessment done in their organizations? Secondly, how do they envisage using the new risk assessment tool and self-assessment questionnaires? And then finally, how can FedEx support you in the rollout of these new tools? And this is really where we'd also very much like input from all of those who've joined us today in reflecting on what you've heard in the webinar so far, and your reflections, builds, thoughts on training and support that you feel you might need. So in terms of how you do that, I think just given the numbers again on the call today, we are going to keep input through the question box. Some of you have used that already, which is fantastic to tell me whether you can see and hear me. It's on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you write in comments, questions in there, and we'll be replying to some, collecting some, taking that away, and thinking about our offering in order to support you. So that really links to the aims of this webinar. It's really about hearing from some members and how they do risk assessment in their organizations and in practice, in order to kind of inspire us to think and reflect on the support that members would like for in order to start using our self-assessment questionnaire and risk assessment tools, and to support you in doing that, managing opportunities and the challenges that that presents. We also we've had a lot of questions over the last 3 webinars from members joining us, which is great, and we've been gathering all of those. We are making a really extended frequently asked questions document about both of those tools, and we continue to want to do that. So if you still have questions that remain unanswered, then do also send those in today, and we'll be gathering those. And altogether, this is about thinking about what happens in February and March in terms of training and support from FedEx. So I'm now going to hand over to Baz and then Rachel to introduce themselves and a bit about their company.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Bas van den Brink. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Intersnack Procurement. And Intersnack is a European savory snacks producer. Well, of course, everybody asks what's a savory snack? Well, you see all the different products now on your screen. So we make a lot of crisps, specialty snacks, popcorn and nuts. And of course, a lot of extruded snacks. Besides that, we also do a lot of peanut butter. So we produce for the European market. We have about 40 factories, and we produce branded and private label products. All procurement is done centrally through the Intersnack Procurement, where I'm based. And within that organization, I'm responsible for sustainability. Yeah, so basically through our procurement organization, we buy all the raw materials for all the different countries and factories.
Okay, thank you. And just out of interest, what kind of numbers are we talking about in terms of your supply base?
Well, we talk about thousands. So we have a wide range of products, of course, all over the world. And so we face with a rather large supplier base, mainly ingredients. So that's can be quite a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And how many people are in your team?
So the way we organize it is, so we really choose to embed sustainability in the procurement organization. So that means that I'm working back to back with buying leads. And so on sustainability, we're with 2 people here, procurement. At group, we have 2. And on most of the time, our operational companies have somebody. But we from procurement really work back to back with buying teams. And we make the buying teams responsible for the implementation of the sustainability targets. And they're always closely involved in all the sustainability work. So also, and besides that, we work closely back to back with the quality department to assure the compliance is all in place. So we really choose to embed it in all the different categories and not create a standalone sustainability department.
Okay, great. Thank you, Baz. And Rachel, can you talk us through what you're doing?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me okay.
Yep.
So my name is Rachel Dickens, and I work for Morrisons Supermarket as an ethical trade specialist. So for those of you who don't know, Morrisons is a major retailer in the UK, predominantly selling food as well as consumer goods and clothing across around 493 stores. We're also perhaps less well known for being the second largest fresh food manufacturer in the UK. Around 60% of the fresh food products that we sell are actually produced at our own manufacturing sites. And in addition to this, we own 9 distribution centres. I'm sure you can appreciate our supply chain is incredibly vast. Our current policy focuses on supply chains for our own brand products. And at Tier 1, this includes sourcing from over 1,850 suppliers who are located in over 60 different countries. So due to the scale and kind of complexity of our supply chains, the FedEx platform is a very valuable tool to support our business to map and assess risk.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. And in terms of who you work with at Morrisons to do that, is that sort of also kind of cross-function process and practice?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have sort of 5 full-time employees that look specifically in the ethical trading function. And then we also have at-source technical managers who you know are there on the ground that are able to pick up some of the information and feed back to us centrally, as well as kind of trying to embed that within our kind of procurement and commercial teams as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you both. That was really helpful background. And now we'll move on to then that first question in terms of how is risk assessment done in your organisation? And I think we'll start with Baz and then go to Rachel. So Baz, do you want to tell us a bit about what you're doing on this front?
Yes. Yeah, we started off with a wide range of tools because we see there's such a big choice of different tools, and in the end, it was a lot of work to combine all these results and to figure out how they relate to each other. So about a year ago, we really choose to embrace the FedEx risk tool. And through various meetings also with the FedEx staff, really trying to figure out how we can use it as the leading risk tool. And we use it now to evaluate country, product, and supplier risks. And based on those risks, we clearly can prioritize which areas we need to move first. Yeah, and now it's really about further digging into all the functionalities because yeah, it's for us has been quite a steep learning curve.
Okay, and yeah, I can appreciate with a lot of suppliers. I guess the question probably to both of you is how you manage the volume. But I'll let Rachel. Rachel, do you want to tell us about how you are undertaking risk assessment at the moment?
Yep, sure. So we actually use the FedEx combined risk score as a baseline, which is the combination of the various medical cost data and the self-assessment questionnaire. And then we review additional insights from other sources, including trade unions, NGOs, industry initiatives such as the ETI or Stronger Together. We use these insights to consider these sites' worker profile, sort of in light of the information that they may provide. So, for example, is there a strong presence of vulnerable workers at that site? Depending on the results of that review, a supplier's risk rating may be upgraded or downgraded from these FedEx combined baselines. And we also apply a grading system to supplier audits. So if a site provides 2 consecutive green audits, it will result in a review of a site's risk rating and potentially extension to the audit cycle or a downgrade.
Okay, thank you. And do you have a means of you've both got a lot of suppliers on your systems. I mean, is there a way that you manage that kind of volume? Sorry, I asked that to Baz first, I guess.
Yes, well, you need to pick and choose. So also based on the risk rating, that's where you start. So we in particular, we have in the NAT categories, we see a lot of risks which we fully jump on. And I think that's really, I think it's the FedEx risk rating really helps because it can also be well combined, of course, with the questionnaire outcomes and with the audit outcomes. So this really helps us to not just looking at the risks, but also actually combining work on that risk rating based on the results of the SAQs and the audits. And based also, of course, and I think with FedEx now, with the new filtering tools, you can extract much more information from it. So it helps really to push data into information.
Okay, great. And Rachel, do you is it also the case? I guess are you using scores to filter?
Yeah. Ultimately, it's extremely challenging because it's so big, the stuff that we're looking at. We certainly prioritise, so the combined risk scores will give you a high, medium, or a low risk rating. And then in terms of additional due diligence, so going down like the audit route, we prioritise with our high and medium risk suppliers. We also do a bit of a sort of additional work with who we consider to be strategic suppliers to our business, and that can depend on the sourcing country. It can depend on the complexity of their supply chain, but also prioritising depending on almost commercial value as well. There are people who we have long-term relationships with, or who make up a significant proportion of our volumes that we engage with regularly throughout the year to talk about their own programs. And that's how we try manage the large amount of suppliers that we look at on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you both. And I think moving on to the next question then, which is then looking forward, given what goes on in your organisations now, how do you see yourselves using the new tools that FedEx will be launching? And Baz, again, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think the problem with tools is that there's so many of them, and what I've seen also in the past when we use all these different tools, that in the end you get a bit lost in translation. So what we really hope for is, first of all, that all the tools and all the data can be put in information. So these analytical functions are important. And what we really hope is that now with this tool, that hopefully within the FedEx community, we can somehow start having the common language. Really about, so what I really see, there's great dashboards, there's great visuals, and that really can start clarifying the situation. So I hope that the risk tools and all the analytical tools can be used to really get a common understanding on certain situations, because we deal with a lot of customers all over Europe, and because everybody has his own little way of tweaking, in the end we all think we know our risk, but we all talk about something different. And that makes it very difficult, especially, we invest heavily in our supply chains, and we do a lot of work in Africa and in Asia. And so we really need to have that clarity in the end in the supply chain, where we can actually invest and where we can engage on a long-term base.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that then, we'll be picking up probably that discussion in that sort of support piece that we'll be talking about next. Rachel, what do you see in terms of Morrisons, and how you might be integrating these tools in your programs?
Yes, in terms of sort of risk assessment methodology, we don't foresee substantial changes necessarily, but the updated pre-screening function will enable us to better understand risk in our live supply chains. The ability to kind of filter to a preset list of suppliers is extremely useful to us because our supply chains are so big and dynamic. For example, we might have seasonal suppliers who only produce a few individual items for us for up to kind of 3 months a year, if that. So the new function will enable us to regularly review and reprioritise our ongoing ethical trading programme. Similar to Baz, having access to the information in a better visual format will help us a lot with internal communications and ongoing discussions with our commercial teams, how we share that risk information in a more digestible way. It will take a lot from the new tools. And just generally kind of the move to increasing transparency about where the risk data is coming from is very much welcomed. We're often asked by suppliers for more detail about their risk rating, which has sometimes been difficult to provide. Going forward, that risk assessment detail will be more accessible, and we will be able to direct suppliers to the indices being used if requested, which in turn should promote, more confidence in the risk assessment process and better engagement between buyers and suppliers.
Okay, so I think part of that then is also really knowing from your side how to unpack those scores and where to find the information that underlies them, so that you can then have those conversations with suppliers.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. And does that ring bells in terms of what Baz was saying in terms of sort of having sort of more common understandings around how the tool is used and what means what within it? Is that something that you hear from supplying organisations as well, Rachel?
Yeah, definitely. We do get a lot of questions. I think it's really important for us to all to be able to really understand where those risk ratings are coming from, to be able to actually plan on how to address those risks and look at kind of the root cause behind it. So I think the more transparency, the more visibility we have of that, the better, really.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, that's definitely useful as well from a training and support perspective. If I move on then to think about that final question of how can FedEx support you in the rollout of these tools. Before we turn to Baz and Rachel and get their input on this from their perspectives, I'm just going to talk through the training and support plans that we have at FedEx for the launch of the new tools. If you joined us on the self-assessment questionnaire webinar, you will have heard some of this. The risk assessment tool webinars were very packed and busy, and there wasn't time really to go into the plans on how we're supporting on risk assessment. So I'm going to also just talk through that, and then we will get reflections and feedback from Rachel and Baz, as I said. But please, everyone else who's listening, we're very keen. You know that you all work in different sorts of organisation with different kind of in different contexts with different sorts of suppliers, and we do want to hear from you if you do have ideas about what kind of support you would like. So please do use this as an opportunity to write that in and contribute. So in terms of training and support around the launch of the new tools, the first is really in 3 phases, and the first phase is really coming to an end with this webinar. It was in the form of this series of 4 webinars that we've been running, talking about the upcoming changes and the nature of the new tools that we're launching. We've also been creating frequently asked questions documents to go along with those. I know that the risk assessment tool FAQ is yet to go out, but it will go out within this week. And then all the information sitting on our new web pages. And so that's coming to an end now. And then a sort of second phase is going to launch around the middle of February, and the launch of the new self-assessment questionnaire. So here, training and support will be much more around tool use and content and interpretation. So for the self-assessment questionnaire, we will have training webinars that look at changes to the SAQ tool and what this looks and feels like on the platform, as well as interpretation of the supplier-facing management controls report and an introduction to the FedEx supplier workbook that we'll be launching at the same time, which is really about what companies and businesses can do to follow up in areas of weaker practice or just improve areas that are already working well around management systems and focused on the particular SMETA topic areas such as wages or child labour or environment and emissions. So it's that will be a really useful resource, and we'll be looking then in terms of training at how we best use that. And then for the risk assessment tool launch in March, we will have training on the tool at 2 levels, a sort of more basic initial level and then an advanced level, and I will talk a bit about that in the next slide. And that's going to involve sort of guidance and scenario-based learning on how to interpret reports and use the information contained in them effectively and well. And then we'll also have methodology documents for both of those tools, telling us what has gone into them and how they've been built and how scores and indices are compiled. And as always, we will have member services and account management on hand to help us through that process. And then the third phase is really the follow-up. I should say that tool training really will be ongoing throughout 2020 and into the beginning of 2021. I really recognise that different people are going to be moving to these tools at different times, and we'll need that help at different times. But the third phase of support is really about communications and working hard to ensure that supplier members are having timely reminders about filling out the new SAQ, about how to use the supplier workbook, and we're also thinking and looking into whether we can provide some communications templates so that buyer members can also use those templates to directly engage with their suppliers for this purpose as well. So if there's many channels of communication around it, then I think it's going to be more effective. Just in terms of the risk assessment tool launch, we will be, at the moment, we ask that members undertake training to use our risk assessment tool at the moment. And what we will be doing is automatically transferring those that have current access to the risk assessment tool across to access the new tool. But I hope that if you attended last week's webinar, you really get the sense of how different this tool is, and that really we would really strongly recommend that you do undertake that, at least that basic risk assessment tool training again on the new tool, and we'll be running that from 2 weeks prior to launch and then intensively really throughout next year as people move on to that new tool. But for those who want to start from day one and want to be using it from launch, then we will offer this 2 weeks prior to launch, and you can take that training then. And that's really going to be looking at the context of risk assessment, how you access and interpret the core reports in the tool, what the different scores mean and how you can use them, and some basic background to the methods behind some of those scores and indices. But then ongoing, we'll also then be offering this part 2 training on the tool, which is going into much more depth about background to the score development and data sources, the additional reports, because there are a lot, as you have probably gathered, and then also some sort of case study based learning around how you can interpret the reports and how we would recommend you do that. We'll also be looking to make a couple of the reports available to auditors, and we will be offering training on that as well. I have a question. Thank you to Alexandra, who writes, will post-launch reminders be sent via FedEx and automated? They will be sent via FedEx and they will be automated, yes, and we'll also have pop-ups on the advanced platform, so that whenever a member logs in and they need to fill in the self-assessment questionnaire and are yet to have done that or are yet to have finished, then we will be reminding them to do that with pop-ups. And the languages for training webinars will be in Spanish, Latin American Spanish, Chinese and English. The languages for reminders, I am assuming that will probably, in terms of at least on the platform, will take the form of the 12 languages that the SAQ will be available in. But I will follow up in terms of email reminders. I think for me, the point here is really that, yeah, if we can engage with suppliers in different ways, then I think the message is more likely to get through. So as well as FedEx through the platform, we'll also be sending emails, but then if there's also, we can support members to engage their own supply chains, that's another route to doing that. Thank you very much for questions. It's great. Okay. Oh, yeah, finally, but just to note that we'll also be putting out guidance documents around the risk assessment tool, which will go into a lot about definitions, data sources and methods. And as I said, that complete FAQ, which you are feeding into all the time with these brilliant questions, which is great. But now I'd really like to hear back from Baz and Rachel in terms of their kind of builds and reflections on what I've just said. Baz, do you want to go first? And I notice you're on mute.
Yes. Yes, so I think there's a great job has been done on the functionalities. And now, of course, with the training, the usabilities, I think should be all become clear to everybody. So it takes a bit of time, but it's really worth to dig into all the possibilities. What we would be looking forward to would be to get clear references set by FedEx on how to make the interpretation on how to use, for instance, the risk assessment, or what a 5 means or what a 7 means. So because we see that FedEx is being used by various of our customers, but all slightly adapting their own ways of questionnaires and so on. So that way you end up all using the same system, but slightly different, which again makes it very difficult to communicate with each other. So if FedEx could really set that guideline, a consistent guideline on to make sure that we more or less use it in the same way, because quite often we look at from a buyer perspective, saying, well, they need to start managing their suppliers and all in the same way. We, as a European company, look the different way, trying to have a consistent way of working with our customers. So we work with all kind of retailers all over Europe. And we really, really would like to get a clarity from FedEx on what's the way we can use it. What's a good SAQ look like? What's a good score look like? So that guidance would be much appreciated.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's something that we've been talking about in FedEx, and we recognise the need to respond to that, and yeah, indeed, to develop a guideline, I think, and also just and as part of that, what sort of good practice on the tool looks like. Would you have anything else to add, Rebecca?
Hi, yes, thanks, Bex. So this is something that we've been talking about, as Bex mentioned, quite extensively internally, because we have recognised that with the current tool, there are potentially some inconsistencies around how the information is used. With the new tool, the intention is to be slightly more prescriptive around what the information actually means. If you have attended the previous trainings, you will see that the new risk assessment tool in particular is much, much more comprehensive. And in order to be able to effectively use the information, the wealth of information that's in the new risk assessment tool, it will require kind of a deeper level of understanding. And the intention from FedEx is that we ask members to have kind of a more holistic view of risk, and to be able to share that information and the outcomes of that with members, and encourage more consistent communications, especially for those who are communicating the risk scores to the suppliers. It can become confusing from a supplier perspective if one of their buyers is saying that they have a risk score of X, because their one buyer is using one particular area or combining it with something else, and another buyer is using another tool or combining the score with something else. I think we just need to be much clearer for us from a supplier's perspective where exactly what they're being told is coming from, and as where that source of information is coming from, and that's what we can provide with the new risk assessment tool.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
great.
And Rachel, did you also have any kind of thoughts or builds or other ideas around support from FedEx?
Just to kind of follow up on Baz's point, we would, as a buyer, we would, welcome any kind of sort of insight and guidelines, because we are very conscious that we sometimes ask for very different things, and we try to be as consistent as we can. So that would be great. Generally, I suppose from our point of view, we're a little bit apprehensive about what impact the updates to the risk assessment tool and also the FAQ will have on our suppliers' current risk scores, because we use that as part of our assessment process. Very, very confident in the work that has been done, and that any kind of significant movement in scores will be justified by the data that sits behind them. But as a buyer, I want to be able to support my suppliers through any changes. So getting early insight from FedEx on what the potential impact looks like would be really, really useful for us to help prepare and start that communication as early as possible. Generally, I think there has been, a really good level of communication from FedEx about the changes that are coming, about when the new tools will launch, and all the training that's available. And I'd just say to kind of continue that, keep that ticking over, will be really useful. From a functionality point of view, because we have such a large number of suppliers linked to us on FedEx, the tools often run incredibly slowly, or they fail to generate reports without substantial filtering first. This can become quite frustrating, because we know that the data and information is there for us to look at. We just can't always access it and use the platform to its full potential because of that And then I suppose as kind of a final point or call out would be, again, it's similar to what Baz was referring to, but kind of what's next? How do we look at this potential risk and verify it for what's actually going on in our supply chain? We have a lot of audit data out there that can partially contribute to this, but we need to be confident in the quality of the audit methodology and the findings, and also kind of get some access to that information in a format that can be mined. But I believe that's all part of the kind of audit quality programs that I think you've got going on as well at FedEx, if I'm right.
Yeah, indeed. We have a day today about our audit quality program, with our affiliate audit companies as well. So but that's interesting. So there's also, I think that's really helpful, and I think we are definitely having conversations within FedEx around that broader piece around what next, what are the options available, and how can we support our members in making those decisions, given programs with limited resources and limited time sometimes. But that it's so. I guess what I'm hearing from both of you is partly from Baz, and it's interesting that Emma wrote in to say that she agreed with your point. There's something around the consistency of how we use information within the tool and how it's interpreted and how we would suggest it's communicated. And then I guess your point, Rachel, is then another step out from that also is some guidance and support or direction on the what next steps, and how, in terms of the due diligence cycle, how you're then thinking about responding to that kind of risk information. And audits is one route, and there are others out there. I hope I've sufficiently summarized what you have said. I think in terms of guidance and suppliers, I'd be interested to maybe hear from you, Rachel, about what helping your suppliers through the process might look like from your side. But I think in terms of earliest possible support, I think as soon as the numbers start coming in from across our supply base in FedEx, we are going to be analysing that and then trying to understand what sort of then support we need to be giving to different types of members who have suppliers in different places and are facing sort of different results out of the system. So thank you very much for your input on that. I'm keen to hear from others on the call if you also have training and support needs, and whether you have adds or builds onto what we've heard from Rachel and Baz as well. But Rachel, you talked about helping suppliers through the process. Could you unpack that a little bit?
I can try, certainly. I suppose where I was going with that point was, and please correct me if I'm wrong with my understanding, is that the way the kind of scoring will be generated when the new SAQ is in place as well, the weighting will be slightly different than it is currently. So there'll be less of the SAQ brought into those scores, and it will be more based on the indices that the risk assessment tool is drawing on. And if so, it could potentially, it might not, but it could potentially change the overall scores that some of our supplier sites are sitting at, which would then change whether or not they need to provide an ethical audit, or how frequently we might ask them to provide an ethical audit. And if that's the case, obviously we would want to work through them with those suppliers sort of within a reasonable period of time, rather than just saying, right, as of tomorrow we needed a new audit now. Obviously that's absolutely not the way to do it. and therefore the earlier we can kind of see where that impact might be, if there is any, the easier it is for us to prepare and get in touch with the suppliers that might be affected, to encourage more suppliers to move to the new SAQ. It's gonna, that's gonna take quite a long time. So I suppose it's thinking about, one, how we can help from FedEx to promote the new tools and that transfer from the old to the new, but also kind of prepare for any kind of frequently asked questions that we might get as well, and just helping almost provide that kind of step-by-step guidance if needed on how to get through that process, what our expectations will be, when do we kind of want suppliers to have completed some of the new tools by, because obviously at some point we've got to draw a consistent line of where we're applying the same risk assessment to all our supply base. Otherwise it's unfair. We're asking different things from different suppliers. So that's kind of where I was going at that point. I hope that makes more sense.
No, that's really helpful. And I think also those conversations, they might look a bit different as well, because the nature of the information you have at your fingertips is also a little bit more granular now, which is maybe also a different kind of conversation that you might have had from before. So I can, that's really very helpful input. And I take on your point about timing and being able to answer those questions that suppliers might have. So I think that's also something we need to think about in terms of FAQs. It's not only what an organisation might be asking, but also what their suppliers might be asking that organisation. So that's really helpful. Thank you. In terms of just looking at some things that have been sent in, Emma says about asking about testing. We are going to be testing heavily, and that also links, I guess, to Rachel's point about really having very high volumes of suppliers on the system. And we do recognise that many of our members have a lot of suppliers, and that this does need to work at really high supplier numbers. So that's definitely part of the testing regimen. And I will pass that on just to re-emphasize that point to the testing team. Okay, and Emma also says, thank you so much for your input. Support as early as possible is really helpful, Emma points out, and that our suppliers tend to come to us rather than to FedEx for help and assistance, and we appreciate that as well. And do you have, I think Rebecca has a point on that.
Yeah, I just think, thanks Emma for that point, because I think that's really important, and we want to be giving, we talked about consistency earlier in the webinar, and I think it's important that the message that we give to your supply bases is the same as the message that you're giving to your supply base. We will be sending out communications to all of our members, no matter kind of what membership type they have. And it really, I think that consistency will ensure that it's clear for suppliers exactly what they're being asked to do. So you following kind of the communications, and if you are an A or AB member and have access to an account manager, please make use of them, especially when it comes to potentially, for those of you who may be a one-man band within responsible sourcing or within ethical trade, and do need kind of extra support, potentially to emphasize the changes internally, potentially to your procurement teams, or even within a kind of supplier event or something like that, where it might be appropriate for you to have some support from FedEx, either some slide information that you could share, or another format if necessary. Those are the types of things that please do use your account manager for, because we do have, and we can build some of those types of resources So not just an email, but other types of engagement within your business and also within your supply chain as well.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. And Daniel has also written in to say, are there going to be new FedEx advanced guidelines to support the changes? Because he often sends guidance to the suppliers himself, and yes, we definitely will. And I think we will almost certainly continue to sort of use both e-learning as a repository for that information, but also we've got these websites, web pages on the new tools, and I think we will be putting information on there as well. I know that e-learning isn't always as easily accessible as it could be, and so yeah, just trying to make the support and guidance that we do have easily accessible. So Delete asks, will there be a change in reporting formats of SMETA? We think not. I think this is very much about the sort of SAQ and risk assessment stages of the due diligence cycle, and so this isn't then feeding into, or it's not affecting SMETA at this stage. But if I hear any differently, Dilip, I will get back to you on that in writing. Great. And Emma also asks about sending guidelines out to suppliers, and then hence the question about languages. Languages is always a big issue, and that is something we are aware of, and definitely in terms of SAQ, self-assessment questionnaire, we are looking to have the guidance in the languages that the SAQ is in itself, but then we'll be looking into other guidelines and support, and what languages they need to go out in as well. I wanted to ask Baz and Rachel, just as we come to a close, whether you had any final comments or reflections, and also all of the other people on the call, whether you have any final comments and to send in, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yes, well, from my side, it would be good to somehow exchange with other FedEx member how they apply all these tools. So one of the challenges we see is quite often it's being thought of, okay, the buyer pushes down to the supplier. I would like to turn it around. So how can we use all this information, all these tools that we have, to start also communicating upwards to the buyers and to our customers? One example, you know, we received today again a huge Excel sheet with all kind of supply chain information, which I feel a lot of that is already in FedEx, which just a click away. So how can we translate all the results that have come out of these tools again to really practical communication dashboards, or certain jointly agreed ways of communicating about your supply chain, like aggregated information on your supplier base or your compliance status. Really, I would find it very useful to sometimes sit and exchange with like-minded companies to how can we start using all those good dashboards to really start creating more effective communication between all the supply chain partners and make it as easy as possible. I still feel there's a lot of duplication in this. And the FedEx tools give so much opportunity to tackle that.
Thanks, Baz. I really agree. And I know that there have been some discussions around member engagement and more kind of practical sessions and workshops that would be really useful, especially when members such as yourselves are interested in kind of seeing what their peers are doing and collaborating in that, because that's what this industry in essence is all about, or underlying is collaboration. So yes, I will definitely take your point back and feed that into the work stream that's going on around kind of member engagement and collaboration. Definitely. Thank you.
And Rachel, did you have any final closing points?
Just generally, you know, really, really positive. I think there's some really good outputs coming from FedEx, and I think these are going to be really, really useful updates to the tools available on the platform. Ultimately, you know, the data that you hold is extremely valuable, and for us to be able to access that in new ways, it's really, really useful. I suppose echoing kind of what Baz has said, some practical case studies I think will be really helpful for kind of pushing beyond that risk assessment. Like what are the next steps? How can we use this information to actually, you know, promote positive change in our supply chain? But yeah, really good.
Thank you, and I couldn't agree with you more in terms of positive change in supply chains. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, both of you. And I just wanted to share a lighter point from Dilip, who wonders whether the acronym for the risk assessment tool, RAT, isn't very encouraging. We agree, unfortunately. It's the name that we have been using, and it kind of does what it says on the tin, so to speak. So upon reflection, I think we might be sticking with RAT, or the risk assessment tool, for now.
We have had that discussion internally as well at length. So yeah, it has gone round the houses, but for now we are sticking with RAT. But thank you for your input.
It's difficult enough to change to launch a new tool, isn't it? And then with the new names also get even more confusing. Well, our time is pretty much up. I just wanted to say a really huge thank you to Baz and Rachel for taking time out today to share with us and kind of, I guess, practice what you were just saying, really, Baz, about engaging, sharing, and learning from each other. So thank you so much to both of you. And also thank you to everyone who's joined today. Thanks for your comments and inputs. That's really, as I always say, very helpful in terms of developing our programs. And so thanks for joining us. And I look forward to kind of speaking with you again almost in the new year when we're at launch. Have a good rest of day.